Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we go deep into some fascinating stuff from all sorts of sources. Today, we're looking at land degradation and this idea of planetary boundaries, like the limits for what the Earth can handle, you know?
It's all about making sure we can keep living on this planet and, doing it sustainably.
Right. So we're using excerpts from this UN report called Stepping Back from the Precipice, Transforming Land Management to Stay Within Planetary Boundaries. It's kind of dense, but it's really important stuff. We want to figure out how what we're doing, human actions are messing with these boundaries and what we can do to fix it.
Basically, how to live within our means, but on a planetary scale.
I like that. So first things first, what exactly is land degradation?
Well, it's when the land becomes less productive and less diverse because of things that we do, like cutting down forests, farming in ways that hurt the land, or building cities and sprawling out. And, it's not just a local problem.
Yeah, when you cut down a forest in one place, it can change the rain patterns in another place thousands of miles away.
Exactly. It's all connected. And that's where this idea of planetary boundaries comes in.
Right.
Scientists have figured out that there are 9 processes on Earth that keep the planet stable and resilient. Each process has a limit, a safe operating space.
Like a set of rules for keeping the Earth healthy.
Exactly. And the report says that 7 of these 9 boundaries are directly affected by how we use land. And get this, 6 of them have already been crossed.
That's kind of scary. It's like 6 out of 9 warning lights are flashing red on the Earth's dashboard.
It's definitely a cause for concern.
So let's break down these 7 land-based boundaries one by one. What about land system change? What is that?
So land system change is all about converting natural ecosystems like forests into areas that are dominated by humans, for things like agriculture and cities. But forests, they play a vital role. They regulate the climate, they support biodiversity, and they're essential for the water cycle.
Right. Trees are like the lungs of the planet.
Exactly. And when we cut down forests or convert land in unsustainable ways, it throws this boundary out of whack. The report measures this by looking at how much forest area we have today compared to what we could have if humans hadn't interfered so much.
And we've lost a lot of forests, haven't we?
A significant amount, yes.
It makes you wonder how we can balance our need for farmland with the need to protect these forests. It seems like deforestation is also connected to other planetary boundaries, like climate change.
It definitely is. Agriculture is a major contributor to deforestation, and it also releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Plus, unsustainable farming practices lead to more greenhouse gas emissions. We're way past the safe zone for climate change. The evidence is everywhere you look. From rising temperatures to extreme weather events to entire ecosystems being disrupted.
It's pretty alarming. All right, so the third land-based boundary is called change in biosphere integrity, and it basically measures the health of all life on Earth.
It looks at how many species there are and how well ecosystems are functioning.
And we're losing species at an alarming rate, aren't we?
Yes, the extinction rate is now 10 to 100 times higher than the natural rate. But the report also emphasizes something called functional diversity.
What's that?
It's measured by something called HNPP, which stands for Human Appropriation of Net Primary Production.
Catchy. What does it mean?
Basically, it measures how much of the energy produced by plants through photosynthesis ends up being used by humans. A high HNPP value means we're gobbling up way too much of the planet's resources, like overdrawing from a bank account, leaving less for other species and for future generations.
That's not a good sign.
No, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It indicates that we've crossed the safe operating space for this boundary as well.
Okay. And then there's freshwater change. I think most people know that only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh water. And we rely on healthy land ecosystems to keep that water cycle going. But that resource is under a lot of stress, isn't it?
Yes. The report distinguishes between blue water, which is surface, and groundwater, and green water, which includes things like precipitation evaporation and soil moisture. And the problem is that we're using up groundwater faster than it can be replenished.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in almost half of the world's aquifers, groundwater extraction is exceeding replenishment rates.
Okay. So that's a big problem then.
A significant one, yes.
Okay, let's move on to the fifth boundary, which is biogeochemical flows. It's a mouthful, but it's basically about the cycling of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, things that are essential for plant growth.
Right. But unsustainable agricultural practices, like using too much fertilizer, they disrupt these natural cycles.
It's like we're giving the soil an overdose.
That's a good way to put it. These excess nutrients end up in our waterways, causing algal blooms and dead zones in aquatic ecosystems.
And the report says we've crossed the boundaries for both nitrogen and phosphorus, right?
Yes, by a significant margin. It's having widespread consequences.
The sixth boundary is called novel entities. What are novel entities?
It's basically all the new substances that we're introducing into the environment. Things like pesticides, antibiotics, microplastics, all those things that haven't really existed in nature before.
And we're pumping them out faster than we can figure out what they do right.
That's the problem. We often don't discover the unintended consequences until it's too late. Like DDT, which was a pesticide that was supposed to be a miracle solution, turns out it had devastating effects on wildlife and human health, and we're still dealing with the fallout today.
That raises an interesting question. How do we develop new technologies without putting the planet at risk?
It's a question we need to be asking ourselves constantly.
All right, last but not least, we have atmospheric aerosol loading, which is basically the amount of tiny particles in the atmosphere.
Right. Some of these particles come from natural sources like dust storms, but a lot of it comes from human activities like deforestation and unsustainable land management.
So we're basically polluting the air we breathe.
Well, the good news is that unlike the other 6 boundaries, atmospheric aerosol loading is still within the safe operating space globally. Although there are regional hotspots where aerosol pollution is a major problem for human health and the climate.
So that's one small glimmer of hope. But overall, the picture is pretty grim. We've crossed 6 out of 7 land-based planetary boundaries. We definitely need to make some changes.
The report does offer some hope, though. It outlines a range of transformative actions that could help us address land degradation and get back within those safe limits. These solutions offer a path towards a more sustainable future.
But it's not just about the planet as a whole, right? It's about people, too. And it seems like exceeding these planetary boundaries hits some groups harder than others, like women, youth, indigenous peoples, and local communities.
Yeah, those groups often end up on the front lines of environmental damage because they have less access to resources and less say in decision-making. There was a study in Papua New Guinea that showed men and women value different things when it comes to ecosystems, like the services that ecosystems provide.
So men might focus on timber, while women might be more concerned about the plants they use for food and medicine.
Exactly. So it's crucial to consider gender equity when we're talking about managing land sustainably. And we need governance structures that are inclusive and take into account the unique needs and contributions of these groups.
Makes sense. So what can we actually do to address these challenges and move towards a more sustainable way of living?
The report outlines a bunch of transformative actions, like starting with regenerative agriculture and soil health. Regenerative agriculture is all about working with nature instead of against it. Minimizing soil disturbance, keeping the soil covered with plants, and diversifying the crops that are grown.
It sounds like a much more holistic approach to farming.
Right. It's about building healthy soil, which helps sequester carbon, improve fertility, and make the land more resilient to things like drought and erosion.
And are there any specific examples of plants that are really good for this?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Vetiver grass, for example. It has this incredibly deep root system that helps hold the soil together and prevent erosion. It's a great tool for rehabilitating land that's been degraded.
That's cool. So beyond agriculture ecosystem, restoration seems like a really important piece of the puzzle.
It is. The report talks about restoring forests, grasslands, savannas, and peatlands. Like in the southeastern United States, they're reintroducing fire and pine savannas to promote biodiversity. And there are amazing community-led peatland restoration projects happening in Indonesia. It's all about figuring out what each ecosystem needs and then using the right techniques to bring it back to health.
It sounds like a lot of work, but it's worth it if it helps us get back within those planetary boundaries.
Definitely. And sustainable water resource management is another crucial piece.
It's hard to imagine anything more important than water.
Right. And the report highlights these integrated approaches that combine green infrastructure with what's called gray infrastructure.
So using nature's solutions alongside more traditional engineering solutions.
Yeah. There's this great project in Morocco where they're reducing flash floods and soil erosion by protecting the land from overgrazing. And they're also using things like rock dams and water towers to store water more effectively.
It's like they're working with the natural landscape instead of trying to fight it.
Exactly. And technology can also play a role in sustainable land management.
It seems like there's so many cool new technologies emerging all the time.
Right. The report talks about things like precision farming, remote sensing, and field robotics. Using data and technology to monitor land degradation, optimize how we use resources, and reduce the need for harmful inputs like pesticides.
So we can be more efficient and less destructive at the same time.
Precisely. For instance, they're using remote sensing in Vietnam to map smallholder coffee production, which helps empower farmers and promote sustainable practices.
That's awesome. And then there are sustainable supply chains,
Yeah.
making sure that the products we buy aren't contributing to land degradation.
Right. We need to be thinking about land degradation throughout the entire production process, from where we get the raw materials to how the products are manufactured, transported, and distributed.
More and more consumers are demanding transparency and accountability from the companies they buy from.
And companies are starting to respond by implementing sustainability initiatives across their supply chains. Tracing products back to their origins so they can ensure responsible sourcing and minimize environmental damage.
It's good to see that things are moving in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. And another critical area is strengthening land governance. Things like promoting secure land tenure, participatory land use planning, and effective mechanisms for resolving conflicts.
It sounds like it's all about making sure that people have a voice in how the land is managed.
Exactly. When people have secure rights to their land, they're more likely to invest in its long-term health and productivity. Like in Benin, there was a study that showed that land registration led to a significant decrease in tree cover loss and forest fires. It's about creating incentives for sustainable land management.
Right. So it's not just about changing our farming practices or restoring ecosystems. It's also about putting in place the right policies and structures to support those changes.
It's a systemic approach.
Okay, so we've talked about all these transformative actions, but I'm wondering, what about the bigger picture? Do we need some kind of global shift in mindset to make this happen?
Absolutely. Those actions are great, but they need to be embedded in a supportive environment. With policies that incentivize sustainable practices, investment strategies that promote sustainable land management, and a commitment to fairness and justice.
So what would that look like in practice?
Well, the report highlights the importance of coherent policies. Policies that actually encourage sustainable practices rather than undermining them. Like the EU has this deforestation regulation that aims to curb deforestation by requiring companies to prove that the products they're selling aren't contributing to forest loss. That's the kind of policy we need more of on a global scale.
And what about investment? Money talks, right?
It does. We need both public and private investment to drive sustainable land management. There are innovative mechanisms like payments for ecosystem services and REDD+ that offer ways to finance conservation and restoration efforts.
And I imagine the whole issue of fairness and justice is really important too, making sure that everyone benefits from the solutions.
Absolutely. The report talks about actor fair shares, which is this idea of allocating responsibility for staying within planetary boundaries based on things like a country's historical emissions and its capacity to act.
So basically figuring out who needs to do what to make sure everyone is contributing their fair share.
Right, but it's a complex issue. We need to figure out a system that's both fair and effective. And the report also emphasizes the importance of a strong science policy interface.
So making sure that scientists and policymakers are talking to each other and working together.
Exactly. We need to bridge the gap between research and action, using scientific insights to inform policy decisions and guide transformative change.
So it's not enough to just have the knowledge. We need to use it to make real-world changes.
Precisely. This deep dive has really revealed how interconnected everything is. Land degradation, planetary boundaries, and human well-being, they're all intertwined.
Yeah, it's clear that we can't solve one problem without addressing the others.
Right. We've explored these alarming trends and the complex challenges we face, but we've also seen that there are transformative actions we can take to shift course. We have the knowledge and the tools to address this crisis.
The question is, do we have the will?
It's a question we all need to ask ourselves.
And it's not just a one-size-fits-all solution, right? I mean, what works in one place might not work in another.
Absolutely. Local communities need to be empowered to implement solutions that make sense for their specific circumstances. The report talks about taking a bottom-up approach where local knowledge and practices are combined with scientific insights.
So it's like finding a balance between global frameworks and local actions.
Right. It's about recognizing that there's no silver bullet.
Well, I think this deep dive has really given us a lot to think about. It's shown us how interconnected land degradation, planetary boundaries, and human well-being really are.
They're all pieces of the same puzzle.
And we've explored these alarming trends and the challenges we face. But we've also seen that there are actions we can take to turn things around.
We have the knowledge. We have the tools. The question is, will we use them?
It's a question we all need to ask ourselves. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Think about your own role in this story. How do your choices, the way you interact with nature, and the things you do in your community contribute to or help solve the problem of land degradation?
We all have a part to play in creating a sustainable future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into land degradation and planetary boundaries. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep taking action.
It's a journey we're all on together.